Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Natasha Harvey, and on behalf of Everbridge, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar entitled Improving Employee Safety in a Mobile World. With an increase in staff at fluid locations, it is key to have a strategy in place to support your workforce wherever they are located. With multiple teams and staff travelling between locations and an increase in acts of terror, how do you ensure that you can keep your people safe? In the next 45 minutes, our guest speaker will be offering further practical advice and sensible precautions employers can take to help keep their staff out of harm's way. This webinar is being recorded, and to support the content today, we'll send you all a copy of the practical guide and a link to the recording, which we encourage you to share with your staff. Following Steve's overview, we'll be giving you a short introduction to Everbridge with a Q&A session towards the end. All of you on the call today are in listen-only mode. However, you can submit a question at any time during the webinar by typing in the open text field in the questions panel and send your questions to all panelists. We'll review and collate the questions as we go along, and we aim to cover as many as we can in the Q&A session at the end. So I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker, Steve Swain. Steve retired as Chief Superintendent in the Metropolitan Police Service in 2006, and since then has worked at Control Risks as CEO of Security Innovation and Technology Consortium. His last post was Head of the Police, International Counter-Terrorist Unit, a National Police and MI5 unit, with responsibility for designing counter-terrorist policing options for the UK. Steve has worked with MI5, Special Branch and the Anti-Terrorist Branch to produce assessments of the national intelligence picture. He is a leading authority on suicide terrorism and the architect of UK tactics to counter the threat from international and domestic terror groups. Welcome, Steve, and thank you for making the time to share your expertise with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to now hand over to Steve. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and good afternoon, everyone who's listening to us today. You've had the introduction from Natasha, and what I'd like to talk to you today is about how you can ensure the safety of your employees whilst they're moving around both at home and abroad in the light of the sort of threats that we face nowadays. And the first thing I want to cover is about the employer's duty of care to employees. And this is the health and safety legislation. You can see more about this on the internet, but it does state that it's an employer's duty to protect the health, safety and welfare of their employees. And what this means is that you've got to examine the risks that they face, both in the workplace and when they're moving around on your behalf, whether that's in the UK or overseas. And you've got to manage those risks so that the risk of injury or damage to health is minimised as much as is possible. So as I've already said, you have a duty under health and safety to assess risks in the workplace, and you must give information to employees about the risks that might be present in the workplace and what steps you've taken to protect them from these risks. And to go along with that, you must also give them instructions and training on how they can best manage those risks. And as the title of this presentation suggests, with this mobility, an employee's workplace is anywhere where they are working for you. So that might be in the office, that could be working from home, although of course domestic risks are not covered by this, or it could be overseas as well. One thing I have seen is that there is a broader benefit from doing this, that looking after the physical and mental well-being of your workers is a good business case as well. Because if you can demonstrate to your employees that you have got commitment to their welfare and safety, then that builds trust and makes them feel better about working for you. And you can also see such returns as better staff retention, better productivity, and employees are more interested in working for you if you care about them. Now, I don't want to frighten you with this piece of legislation, but a lot of organisations I've met have never even heard of this. But the Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act 2007 is a piece of legislation brought in by the Labour government, obviously in 2007. And it's designed to ensure that senior directors in companies look after their staff. So the actual act talks about an organisation to which this section applies is guilty of an offence if the way in which its activities are managed or organised causes a person's death and amounts to a gross breach of a relevant duty of care owned by the organisation to the deceased. And an organisation is guilty of an offence under this only if the way in which its activities as managed or organised by the senior management is a substantial element in the breach referred to. I've read that out because I just think it's important that you understand your liability under this sort of legislation. Senior management in relation to an organisation means the persons who play significant roles in the making of decisions about how the whole or a substantive part of its activities are to be managed or organised, or the actual managing or organising of the whole or a substantial part of those activities. So if you have a workplace where you're handling dangerous chemicals or something like that, and you haven't got lots of safety measures in place, and as a result somebody dies, then you might be guilty of an offence under this act. And if you look at this part of it here, the organisation to which this section applies are a corporation, a department or other public body listed in Schedule 1. Now Schedule 1 is usually the public sector, that's what it really covers. A police force, a partnership or a trade union or employers association that is an employer. Now a corporation for this act is any company. So if you work for a company under this act, you are a corporation, so you come within the jurisdiction of this piece of legislation. So with this in mind, if you look at your own organisation, have you got somebody within the organisation who has responsibility for ensuring that your company complies with this legislation? And a lot of companies I've met actually don't have anyone doing this. It's a bit of a bolt-on to somebody else's job. And it may be that if you're in a fairly small company, that's appropriate. But if you're in a larger company and you do engage in activities where you send employees to hazardous areas, it may be that you might want to think about having somebody whose sole responsibility is this sort of activity. And the other key thing about this person is, are they actually empowered to make decisions and protect your organisation and its employees? If they have to refer upwards on any decision they're making, then I would suggest to you that they probably not, that responsibility is not at the right level. Most companies that do this, it's a board level responsibility, and that person has to ensure that they're not jeopardising your company under the Health and Safety at Work Acts or Corporate Manslaughter and Homicide Act. So one of the other things that I meet on a fairly regular basis when I've been going around companies is if something happened in the workplace or something happened to one of your employees, or there was an incident where you got a subsidiary or you may have employees, who's in charge of ensuring that your organisation does something about that incident to protect your employees? Is that so? Have you got a rota for senior managers who can be on call, that people know what their phone number is, how they can contact that person, and are they on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? So that if something happens at weekends, and frankly often incidents do happen at weekends, is there someone that a more junior member of staff can reach out to if something happens affecting an employee? If they're on leave, have you got somebody else that steps in? Have you got support procedures in place for that person so that If they do get a call out because of an incident, have they got somebody that can take notes of any decisions they're making? If they hold any meetings, a minute taker, that sort of issue. And have you got managers that are empowered to help those senior people make these types of decisions? I have seen companies where they have an on-call rota for senior managers, but it's not taken seriously. And it's no good being at a party on a Saturday night if you've had a few drinks and you get a call out for this sort of thing, because if you're unable to manage this, you might render yourself liable for some sort of jeopardy in any subsequent inquiry if you lost a member of staff. So this is quite an important thing for the firms to think about. Who is on call if an incident happens? And there are so many things happening nowadays. If you look around the world with terrorist incidents, if one of those happens that affected your company, who's going to be called out to manage your company's response to that? If you have a lot of people at work, or even if you've only got a few who are travelling either around the UK or overseas on behalf of your company, have you got any policies in place to ensure that that person is protected and your company fulfills its duty of care to them? What airports do they travel to? What airlines do they use? I've worked at Heathrow myself a couple of times and always swore that, having seen the way some airlines operate, that I would never fly on them. But actually, when you become a consultant and you get sent to far-flung parts of the world, you end up travelling on some pretty ropey airlines, but you've got no choice because you've got to get there. I was in Bangladesh once, flying out from the capital to do some security review work, and on our journey home the flight was cancelled, so we ended up getting a taxi for a 120-mile trip. Bangladesh, for those of you who've been there, most vehicles don't have any lights. Seat belts certainly don't exist in most cars, and it was the most frightening 4-hour drive I've ever had, and I wouldn't want to do it again. So it's just things like that that you need to be aware of. When your staff are travelling abroad, do they get any personal safety briefing? The previous webinar that we did for Everbridge talked a lot about that, so you can refer back to that previous one about personal safety briefings while your staff are moving around. And the other thing nowadays is most people carry electronics, mobile phones, computers, tablets. Have you got any policies around their use? Because in certain countries, the state will try and hack into these if they think that you've got something interesting on them. So what policies have you got around the carriage and use of these? And again, another little example, I was in China once, a few years ago, as a serving police officer, and the briefing that we had about what might happen while we were there ended up with most of us literally sleeping with our laptops under our pillow, so that we knew that somebody couldn't get into our room and download all the data that we had on them. Some companies I know actually won't allow employees to take computers and things like that with them overseas, or if they do, they get a cheap one that they can burn at the end of it. The last thing down here about travel approval is about communications procedures. How will you maintain contact with your employees while they're overseas? Will you use mobile phones? Will you make a contact once a day? In some countries you might want to be in contact with them more than that. And if you listen to Natasha at the end of this webinar, she can tell you about the sort of services that Everbridge offer in terms of assisting you to stay in touch with your employees and getting messages out to them if something happens where they are. One of the other things that I've seen quite commonly is locations of employees. Who keeps a record back at head office of where all your employees are that are travelling overseas? Do you know what their travel schedules are? Do you know where they're likely to be? If they're late turning up, or if there's a deviation, have you got a procedure to make sure that you're aware about that? So all these things all contribute to demonstrating that you as an employer take your duty of care very seriously. Pre-travel training. There are a number of companies, if you're sending employees to fairly difficult areas of the world on business, you can do hostile environment awareness training. On the screen in front of you, you'll see a list of the sort of topics that this type of training covers. Threat, risk and mitigation. We'll do a bit more about that in a moment. Are they first aid trained? Would they know what to do if one of their colleagues was injured? Have you got policies about kidnap and hostage? Sounds dramatic, but if you're an organisation that operates in Africa, South America, places like that, this is a real risk for your employees. Conflict management. Have they been trained how to defuse difficult situations? If they're driving around, vehicle safety and security is quite a big topic for this. Don't let yourself get trapped in your vehicle if you're driving around. Excuse me. Counter surveillance. Are you being followed? As I said, in some countries, the state will follow employees around if they're operating in a high interest technology or capability company. So you've got to be aware if you're being surveilled, what you can do about that. How do you get your way around? Nowadays with mobile phones you can download maps, and satellite navigation can help you get around. Because what you don't want to do is to be standing on the corner of a street with a piece of paper trying to find where you're supposed to be going. You need to not stand out as somebody that doesn't really know what they're doing, because that makes your employees more vulnerable. And then the last one down there, have you got a policy so that if your employees are involved in an incident, either at home or overseas, for counselling and helping them overcome any stress that they might suffer as a result of that incident? And there's a picture there of the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris, and these are becoming more and more frequent. So these sort of things are worth thinking about. A very good friend of mine travels to the Middle East on a very regular basis. They do this heat training. They've had first aid. When they actually arrive in country, they have an armed bodyguard team with them for the whole time they're there, because it's good business for the company, but they are aware of how dangerous it is for their employees. So pre-travel training is something that you need to consider as well. Risk assessments, we talked about these. There is a British standard, an international standard, 3100, which sets out the framework for a risk assessment process. There are some mandatory elements of that process to meet that criteria. And on the right hand side you'll see a small matrix that talks about likelihood and the impact of that harm. And some companies have different acceptable levels of risk depending on the return to the company and what their employee is doing and how well trained they are. But the sort of risk you need to think about: what are the threats when they go into that country? What vulnerabilities are there for them when they go there? And this may be that they've got to travel around by vehicle, they've got to go to fairly dangerous areas, all of which increase the vulnerability. And then you need to think about what's the likelihood of something actually happening where they are, and what would be the impact if that did. And just to wrap up this bit about risk assessments, threat plus vulnerability equals risk. So if there is a threat and that person has a vulnerability to do with how they're moving around or what they're engaged in, that creates a risk. You can mitigate these. This is just one slide. This is a whole very big topic that you could look at later on. And some of the things that Everbridge can do can help you to mitigate some of these things as well. Okay, communications. This is one of the keys. Where are your staff? Are they safe? What are they doing? So it's thinking about, how do you actually communicate? Are you going to phone them once a day? Are they going to send you a text message once a day? Do you want to do it more frequently? Are they going to send emails? So all these sorts of things you think about, how am I going to communicate and stay in touch? How are you going to get your employees to report in? Do they do it formally, so they're reporting in to their line manager or to a specifically designated person in the organisation that they're safe and that where they're moving to and where they're moving from? What are the contact points if they're meeting other organisations that are out there? Have you got a method to contact that organisation to make sure your employees got there safely, so that if they do get a breakdown, it doesn't set you off in a panic because you can't get in touch with them because one of your contact points may know about them? Have you got systems internally to enable you to do this? Some of the very big companies will do this, but some of the smaller ones may hand this off to another organisation to do this communication. And again, Natasha will talk about some examples about that at the end. Decision making, if something does happen, who's empowered to make the decisions about what to do about that employee and where they are? And in a minute we'll go on to a threat escalation matrix, which might help you put together a system to do that. But what you need is somebody, and it might be that responsible person we talked about at the beginning, who's going to make those decisions about withdrawal or leave them there. So just talk about threat identification. At the moment, the threat level in the UK is set at severe. And you can see on the screen, low means an attack is unlikely, moderate an attack is possible but not likely, substantial means an attack is a strong possibility, and severe, which is where we are now, means an attack is highly likely. And if you look at events that have happened, September, going back through the summer, you can see that there have been lots of attacks, so we are in a situation where an attack is highly likely. On September the 15th, because of what happened in London, the threat level actually went up to critical, which means an attack is expected imminently. And that's probably because, if you remember on the 15th, there was that attack that didn't go off very well, but was it part of more attacks, a multi-phase attack? So what you can do, your responsible person or somebody else, some of the managers, you can link into the security service and get a really simple syndication feed which will enable you to track changes to the UK threat level. That saves you going in every day and going onto their website and having a look. You just get a notification about it. And at the bottom of the page, there's a web address there that you can click onto, and you can go to the threat levels, or you can just go on Google MI5, and you can get a lot more information. MI5 are very open nowadays about what information that they can give to you to help protect your organisation and your employees. So threat identification, very important if you're sending people overseas. Right, threat escalation matrix. There are 4 alert states to this, which we'll go through. Alert state 1 is caution, and this is the level of threat at which the company normally conducts its business. We're at severe, so we are operating in an environment where an attack is highly likely. Most countries in the Western world are operating at a fairly similar threat level, and the definition of this is that there is a potential for the security situation to deteriorate rapidly, and we've seen that with some of the attacks that have taken place, Paris, Brussels, London, where things do deteriorate very quickly. Your outline actions at this alert state 1 will be to finalise your evacuation plans for immediate implementation, particularly if you've got people operating overseas or in high-risk areas of the UK, and upgrade your own local security to provide high levels of security for your staff. Alert State 2, which is standby, is a heightened level of threat where you'll be ensuring that all your plans are up to date and known, and you can start taking precautionary preparations and make sure that they're complete, so that if something does happen in your vicinity, to your organisation or to one of your overseas employees, your plans are ready to roll. And the definition of this is a security situation, could be at home, or a country instability, could be abroad, and that represents a risk to your staff and the physical assets of your company. What you'll be doing is putting your security at a high level of alert. You'll be minimising your local movement, and you'll be undertaking local security assessments, and perhaps your responsible person, or if you've got a security manager, they'll be able to do those for you. And emerging out of that, if the threat's manageable, you can leave your personnel on site, but just have your plans at immediate notice to move. Or if it's not manageable, you can think about ordering the withdrawal of staff to a safer location. So that's Alert State 2. Moving on to Alert State 3, which is an evacuation with a stay-behind presence. This is the level to which the company feels threatened and decides to evacuate the majority of the staff. So if you had an office block in London, and there was, say for example, you had it near Parliament Square or Borough Market, when you look at what's happened recently in London, you might decide you want to send all your staff home. Your business is going to be severely disrupted, and there might be a critical risk to staff, particularly if it's an ongoing marauding terrorist firearms attack or something like that that we've seen in Brussels and Paris and Mumbai. Your outline actions will be to withdraw all personnel, but you may have some key stay behind staff who need to secure your building and your business and secure all your sites, assets and information. So you might send all your general staff home, but keep these key people there for the time being, and this could be at home or abroad. And then the final part of this threat escalation matrix is your Alert State 4, which is an emergency evacuation. And this is where all or any of your remaining staff are going to evacuate the country, all your business premises, if it's in the UK. This is where there's an extreme risk to company personnel and assets. You're going, and the outline actions are going to evacuate all the staff. To do that, this relocation phase is one of 2 additional post-evacuation phases. So this is the definition of this relocation is temporary basing of evacuated personnel in countries other than their home. So if you have got people that work for you based overseas and you want to withdraw them, have you got measures in place to house them somewhere else? Now, if you look at what happens in the UK, if things happen and people have to be evacuated in the UK, it's the local authority that will do this, where private organisations can't do that. But if you're overseas, it will be something that you need to think about. If I need to withdraw my staff from this African country to another one, how am I going to get them there? Where am I going to house them while they're there? And hopefully what you will have is a business continuity plan around this. Decide whether to repatriate them or keep them at the temporary location. And of course what that will give you is a headache of administrative and human resource management issues, because they'll be clamouring to know what you're going to do with them. And if you've got a good plan, you'll be able to be very slick about doing that and demonstrate that high level of duty of care that you have for them. And then the final part about this is that return phase, where you now consider it safe for certain or all of your personnel to return to the country, and you're going to have a progressive redeployment of people out there, you'll probably do a risk assessment or something like that first before you make that decision. You might consult with a Foreign Office about reactivating your business operations, and then you're going to go back through that alert state actions in reverse to get back to business as normal, if that's possible. It's quite a long list here of factors that you need to consider. What is the present situation? What are likely changes to take place? And companies like Everbridge, there are others as well that can give you up-to-date in-country information on this sort of information. What's the local attitude towards non-Indigenous personnel and businesses? Some countries can be quite hostile to foreigners. You need to think about that. How many employees have you got overseas? Have they got families with them, or are they lone workers? What's the transport network? Can they quickly get to an airport and fly out, or is it going to be difficult? As I said earlier, sometimes driving is not a safe option to do that sort of thing because of the condition of the road network and the vehicles. What about availability of essential supplies, food, water, clothing, warm place to stay, things like that? And how often do you check those? How often are they examined to make sure that they're still fit for purpose? Again, we come back to communications. What's the condition of your internal network? Can you get in touch with them through your internet, or are you relying on an external communications network? Can they get to the local embassy? Can you contact the home government? If you have insurance to protect your employees, quite often insurance companies can give you advice about this sort of thing as well. And of course, what you mustn't forget is that you've probably got a considerable company investment in an overseas location. You will have legal obligations around that. And if you rush out in a panic, are you going to jeopardise your future operations there when the situation is back to normal? And if you do need to evacuate people, are there scheduled or chartered sea or air transport that you can call upon to help you do that? As I said, quite often in a number of countries, driving for a long distance is not a safe option. Okay, moving on now to accountability for your staff. Have you got a list of employees who do go missing after an incident? If you've got systems in place to help you monitor and stay in touch with employees, if you can't get hold of somebody, that immediately puts you on the front foot because you know who is missing after an evacuation or an incident. And local law enforcement, emergency services will be very grateful of a list like that. If you've got employees and subcontractors reporting their locations and status to you, so there is some accountability for your staff as well to do some of these things so that they're helping you provide that duty of care to them. The other issue that you'll get a lot of is about families and other parties inquiring about the event and specific employees. And quite often you see emergency phone numbers come up on the TV after an incident. These get absolutely inundated with calls because everyone thinks they have a relative involved in that and they'll be phoning in. So you need to be able to manage that as well. In a lot of cases, if it's a major incident, the emergency services will provide that, but they will certainly, families will certainly be contacting you as well about that. And have you got systems to help you do that? And the last one down there is about the media. The media love a bad news story. If you're not prepared for the media when they turn up, they will trash your company's reputation very quickly. They need to be managed extraordinarily well. And whilst you're managing this event, it may be something that you will have real problems in managing. And again, Natasha can give you some information about how Everbridge can help you do this so that you get out a consistent message to the media, whoever it is in making inquiries, or families. If you've got that consistent message going out, it reduces all that certainty and provides clear evidence of the duty of care that you're providing to your employees. I've talked a lot as well about contingency planning. Again, there are British and international standards around business continuity management. The most common one in use is 22301 and 22313. There is a business continuity management life cycle. 5 elements to this. The first one is about operational planning and control, is the fact that you've actually got a business continuity plan. If you have this, it enables you to manage your organisation and incidents much better and have a responsible person within the organisation who actually delivers this for you. Business impact analysis and risk assessment. Number 2, we've already talked about risk assessment, but business impact analysis is about if you lost one of your buildings, you lost a key employee, what would be the impact on your organisation if that happened? How long could you survive without that critical person or that key building or piece of technology? So that enables you to make judgments about those, and that contributes to the development of your business continuity strategy. And from number 2, you will get a number of options that will help you to draw up that business continuity strategy. And then from there, you can develop and implement a BCM response. And this will be about emergency management teams, who's in charge, how will you communicate with your staff, all those sorts of issues that will emerge during an incident, either at your home factory or to your staff overseas. And then the last one down here, number 5, is about exercise and testing that plan. It's no good having a plan if you don't exercise it and make sure it works. And this is something that the emergency services practice a large amount, exercising, putting plans in place, exercising them, testing them under as real life situation as you can to make sure they work. And this is probably why the emergency services in the UK and a lot of the others overseas as well are so good at crisis management, because they have these plans and they exercise and test them. And everyone who's been involved, and I've done a lot of these myself, so that when major incidents take place, I know who's at the end of the telephone, I know who I'm talking to and what they can do for me and what I can do for them. So contingency planning is a big part of this duty of care. So just coming to some conclusions now about this. We talked at the start about the duty of care that you owe to your employees, the legislation, Health and Safety Corporate Manslaughter Act, what your responsibilities are for when they're moving around. Have you got an on-call rota for senior managers? Have you developed travel policies, and do you indulge in pre-travel training for your staff? Do you do risk assessments for them before they travel? Have you got a well thought out communication strategy for normal times and abnormal times when incidents happen? Have you got some sort of threat escalation matrix, so as the situation deteriorates, you know what you're going to do, what decisions you're going to make? Do your staff understand all these, so they understand their accountability to make sure that they contact you to let you know they're safe or where they are? And have you got contingency plans in place? So what this all does really is about, there's a duty of care on you to ensure that when people who work for you are moving around their place of work, be that at home in the office or when they're overseas or travelling around the UK, that they know the systems that you've put in place to keep them safe, to maintain contact with them and to help them if something happens. So I'm going to move on now and hand back to Natasha. I hope you found that useful, and thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Steve. There are some excellent tips there that we can all use to help with staff safety. And as a reminder to everyone on the call, you can continue to submit your questions for Steve to answer in the Q&A session if you use the text box and send to all panelists. So having learned about some practical tips on how we can improve staff safety, I'll provide a short overview of Everbridge and how we help organisations to deliver reliable and effective communications to keep people safe. For the past 14 years, Everbridge has partnered with organisations large and small to help keep people safe and their businesses running. Our customers rely on us to assess threats, locate people to assist with the response or those in need of help, automate processes and deliver critical information to the right people at the right time following critical events. These include natural and man-made emergencies, critical events including terror attacks and IT outages. Our solution is designed to help organisations to reach their remote, mobile and travelling workforces during times of crisis. We are a critical event management platform that helps with many types of events. We're confident in our ability to help organisations at any scale because we have over 3,200 customers that use Everbridge for these types of events every day. And we've used that to ensure we have a flexible, scalable and reliable platform that can handle anything thrown at it. So the platform is really critical during large-scale events, but we also support businesses with the day-to-day communications as well. When dealing with the safety of employees in a mobile world, it's important to take into consideration a range of data. So Everbridge monitors your dynamic location. So when we're looking at communicating to our employees in a mobile world, we can monitor your static location, which is where an employee is based, their last known location, based on their geolocation, and also expected, so factoring in things such as travel itineraries. This allows you to ensure the safety of local and remote employees, expand your duty of care for travelling employees, and improve operational response through automating processes. Here is an example of how Everbridge supports our clients with staff safety during times of crisis, so that when the unexpected happens, you can communicate with your teams effectively. You can see here some key feedback that we received following the Westminster Bridge incident in the UK earlier this year. So before I move over to the questions, I'd like to move to a poll to the audience. So I'm just going to launch the poll on the screen now. So how confident are you in your ability to communicate with your staff effectively during a critical event? Okay, that's interesting. So we've got around 77% of you that said you're confident, and the rest are not very confident. So for those who are not confident, you're not alone. A lot of times people don't realise that they don't have the necessary processes in place until after an incident takes place. So that's very interesting. So I'm now going to move on and open up to our questions. Okay, so the first question, Steve, is what is the obligation of an employer to ensure that they can make contact with employees during an incident? So is it okay to say that we've tried to phone them and email them, for example?
The key thing you need in this is an audit trail, so that if something does happen, you can demonstrate to an outside observer that you tried to get in touch with that person and for whatever reason you were unable to do so. So if you sent them email, you can keep copies of that email. If you sent them texts onto their mobile phone or try to phone them, all these types of method of communication would enable you to keep records of when you did try and get in touch with them, so that you've got an audit trail and can demonstrate that you took all measures necessary to get in touch with that person, and for whatever reason it was that you weren't able to.
Okay, that's great. So the next is an employer liable to make sure that they have multi-channels of communication methods. So, for example, is one method enough? So if they've got email, if they're able to be emailed, is that enough? Is there any legalities around that?
Well, they're not really legalities, but if you were in an inquiry and you were asked a question, say by the deceased's solicitor, how did you try and get in touch with Mr. Smith or whoever they are? And what you said is, well, we sent them an email and it didn't work. Then the obvious question to come back is, well, have they got a mobile phone? Did you try their mobile phone? If you can say, yes, I did, and this is when we tried it, and there's 6 attempts at these dates and these times, that's quite powerful. But if you said, well, no, all we did is we just tried email and gave up after that, it paints a picture that you weren't really taking this very seriously.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. So I think we're coming to the end of our allotted time for the webinar. So thank you, Steve, for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. So if you'd like any more information on Everbridge, you can find us online and on social media, and we'll make sure that we email you all a copy of the recording link and the guide that's on the screen to accompany Steve's session. Thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.